Billionaire never knew why his baby
What in
slept
the world
standing
are you
until
doing?
a 7-year-old poor girl discovered the truth and left everyone moved. Before we unfold this journey, drop a like and comment where you're watching from, and one word of encouragement. The scream pierced through the marble halls of the Whitmore estate at exactly 3:17 a.m., shattering the pristine silence that money could buy but never guarantee. Marcus Whitmore, 30 years old and worth more billions than most small countries' GDP, bolted upright from his king-sized bed like a man shot from a cannon. His heart hammered against his ribs with the desperate rhythm of panic, a sound that had become his nightly symphony for the past 4 months. The baby monitor crackled with static, then fell into that terrible kind of silence that makes every parent's blood turn to ice water in their veins. He could hear his own ragged breathing echoing back at him through the expensive speakers, but nothing else. No crying, no movement, just the electronic hum of fear amplified through cutting-edge technology. Marcus sprinted down the corridor, his bare feet slapping against the cold marble with the urgency of a man running toward disaster. He flew past portraits of stern-faced ancestors who had built this empire, past rooms filled with priceless antiques and art that suddenly meant nothing compared to what might be happening in the nursery at the end of the hall. The nursery door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap Marcus could see him, his 18-month-old son, Daniel, standing perfectly upright in his crib like a tiny soldier frozen at attention. The child's eyes were closed, his breathing steady and rhythmic, but his small body remained unnaturally vertical, swaying slightly, as if caught in some invisible current that only he could feel. "Danny?" Marcus whispered, his voice cracking like a teenager's as he approached the crib with the careful, measured steps of someone attempting to defuse a live bomb. The baby didn't respond, didn't even flutter an eyelid. This was the 3rd time this week, the 7th time this month. His son was sleeping, standing up, and despite consulting with the finest medical minds money could buy, nobody could tell him why. Dr. Sarah Chen from Johns Hopkins had called it unusual, but not necessarily harmful. But Marcus had seen the confusion swimming in her intelligent brown eyes. The pediatric sleep specialist had used clinical terms like parasomnia and developmental phase, throwing around medical jargon like protective shields. But her uncertainty had been as obvious as a neon sign in the darkness. She'd never encountered anything quite like this, and neither had the 3 other world-renowned specialists he'd flown in from Boston, Los Angeles, and even Switzerland. Marcus reached into the crib with trembling hands and gently lifted Daniel, feeling the child's body remain unnaturally stiff for several long seconds before finally melting against his father's chest like warm honey. The baby's breathing deepened, and his tiny fist curled around Marcus's silk pajama shirt with desperate strength. But even in sleep, there was something profoundly different about him, something that made Marcus's chest tighten with a nameless fear that had been growing stronger every night. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the vast manicured gardens of his Connecticut estate, Marcus held his son against his heart and wondered if all the money in the world could buy him the one thing he needed most desperately: answers to questions that seemed to have no earthly solutions. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 times, its ancient voice echoing through the mansion like a funeral bell. And somewhere in the distance he could swear he heard the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. When he pressed his face to the cold glass and stared out into the darkness, nothing moved except the shadows cast by the ancient oak trees, their twisted branches reaching toward the house like gnarled fingers in the moonlight. 6 weeks later, Marcus stood in his state-of-the-art kitchen at dawn, watching his son's nanny, Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, attempt another feeding with the patience of a saint and the determination of a woman who had raised 5 children of her own. Daniel sat strapped into his designer high chair, his dark eyes, so heartbreakingly reminiscent of his late mother's, staring past them both, as if he could see something in the distance that remained invisible to everyone else in the room. The standing sleep episodes had not only continued, but had increased to nearly every single night, sometimes multiple times per night, and Marcus was beginning to feel like he was slowly losing whatever remained of his sanity. He'd started keeping detailed logs, recording times, duration, and any possible triggers, but the data revealed nothing except the maddening consistency of the inexplicable. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs." Rodriguez said gently, her voice carrying the slight accent that reminded him of warm summer evenings and simpler times. "Perhaps we should consider trying that new specialist Dr. Martinez recommended? The one from the Children's Hospital in New York City who specializes in unusual sleep disorders?" Marcus rubbed his temples, where a headache had been building steadily for what felt like days, the pressure behind his eyes matching the weight that seemed to have taken permanent residence on his shoulders. "I've already called 17 different specialists, Elena, 17 of the most brilliant minds in pediatric medicine. They all say essentially the same thing: unusual but manageable, nothing immediately dangerous. Nobody can tell me why my son sleeps like he's terrified to lie down." The truth was far darker than he'd been willing to admit to anyone, including himself. Daniel didn't just sleep standing up. He seemed genuinely terrified of lying flat on any surface. Every single attempt to lay him down in a normal sleeping position resulted in screams that could wake the dead, his little body going completely rigid with what could only be described as pure primal panic. It was as if the act of lying down triggered some deep-seated fear that Marcus couldn't begin to understand or rationalize. "Mrs." Rodriguez moved around the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades caring for other people's children, cleaning bottles and preparing Daniel's morning meal with movements that spoke of countless repetitions. But Marcus could see the worry lines deepening around her kind eyes, etching themselves deeper each passing day. She'd been with the Whitmore family since before Daniel was born, had helped Marcus navigate those first devastating months after his wife Sophia's death during childbirth, a tragedy that had left him a widower and single father before he'd even learned how to change a diaper properly. The intercom system crackled to life with its distinctive electronic chirp, and the deep, professionally trained voice of his head of security, James Morrison, filled the spacious kitchen with an undercurrent of controlled tension. "Mr. Whitmore, we've had another incident at the North Gate perimeter. Same pattern as the previous incidents, someone or something testing our security measures around 3 a.m. No visual contact established, but the motion sensors and thermal imaging picked up definite movement patterns consistent with human reconnaissance." Marcus felt his jaw muscles tighten involuntarily, a physical manifestation of the stress that had become his constant companion. For the past month and a half, there had been increasingly frequent signs that someone was systematically watching the estate, studying their routines and security protocols. Nothing concrete enough to justify calling in law enforcement, but certainly enough evidence to make him double the security detail and install additional cameras and sensors around the property perimeter. "Increase the patrol frequency to every 30 minutes, Marcus ordered, his voice carrying the authority that had built a business empire but couldn't solve his son's mysterious condition. "And James, I want someone monitoring the house around the clock. If there's someone out there playing games with us, I want to know exactly who they are, what they want, and how far they're willing to go to get it." The crash that shattered the peaceful silence of the Whitmore estate came from the direction of the kitchen at precisely 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday night in late October, when the autumn air carried the promise of winter, and the trees surrounding the property had begun their spectacular transformation into shades of gold and crimson. Marcus shot awake with the instant alertness of a man whose nerves had been stretched to their absolute breaking point, his father's instincts screaming danger even before his conscious mind had fully processed what had awakened him. This wasn't Daniel. His son was sleeping in his characteristic standing position in the nursery, same as every single night for months now, monitored by both Mrs. Rodriguez and the sophisticated baby monitoring system that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. This sound was something entirely different, something that didn't belong in the carefully orchestrated world he'd created to protect his family. Marcus grabbed the Louisville Slugger baseball bat he'd started keeping beside his bed like some suburban homeowner afraid of burglars, though he knew that any real threat to someone of his wealth and prominence would likely be far more sophisticated than anything a baseball bat could handle. He moved silently toward the stairs, his bare feet finding the familiar path through his home with the muscle memory of countless middle-of-the-night trips to check on Daniel. The multi-million-dollar security system that he'd installed after the first suspicious incidents should have immediately alerted him to any breach of the property perimeter. But when he glanced at the control panels, the usually reassuring green lights had been replaced by an ominous red glow that made his stomach drop like a stone. Someone had not just breached his security, they had systematically disabled his state-of-the-art protection network with what appeared to be considerable technical expertise. The kitchen was bathed in ethereal moonlight, streaming through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the estate's gardens during the day, and at first glance, Marcus saw nothing obviously out of place. Then movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. A small figure crouched beside the industrial-sized refrigerator, methodically stuffing food items into what appeared to be a torn and battered backpack with the desperate efficiency of someone who had learned to steal quickly or not at all. This wasn't a professional thief executing a carefully planned heist, wasn't some paparazzi photographer hoping to capture compromising images of the mysterious Whitmore heir for the tabloid scandal sheets. This was something far more unexpected and heartbreaking. This was a child, small and vulnerable, caught in the act of simple survival. "Hey!" Marcus called out, stepping into the pool of moonlight that illuminated the kitchen's center island. The figure froze completely, every muscle tensing like a wild animal, suddenly caught in the glare of oncoming headlights, then slowly, cautiously turned around to face him. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with tangled brown hair that looked like it hadn't seen a proper brush in weeks, and clothes that had clearly seen better months, not just better days. Her face was streaked with dirt, and what might have been tears, her eyes enormous and the kind of startling blue that seemed almost translucent in the moonlight, like looking through clear water to see the sky reflected beneath. She clutched a half-eaten apple in one small hand and a piece of cheese in the other, and she looked at him with the expression of someone far older than her years. Someone who had learned too young that the world was not a safe or predictable place. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, carrying the weight of desperation that no child should ever have to bear. I'm really hungry. I didn't mean to break anything." Marcus lowered the baseball bat, feeling his heart break at the sight of her obvious need and fear. Here he was, living in a mansion that could house dozens of families, and this child was risking everything just to steal scraps of food to survive another day. "How did you get in here?" Marcus asked, his voice much gentler now as he took in the full extent of the child's condition. "The security system. It's supposed to be impossible to breach without triggering multiple alarms." The little girl wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her pale cheek. "I know about wires and stuff," she said simply, as if a 7-year-old being able to disable a professional security system that had cost him nearly $500,000 was the most natural thing in the world. "My daddy taught me about electricity and circuits and things like that before he had to go away and couldn't teach me anymore." Something about her straightforward manner and the matter-of-fact way she spoke about technical concepts that most adults couldn't grasp stopped Marcus from immediately calling his security team or the police. Maybe it was the way she held herself with a dignity that poverty and hardship hadn't been able to completely strip away. Or perhaps it was the undeniable fact that she had managed to breach a system that was supposed to be impenetrable. Whatever the reason, he found himself genuinely curious about this strange, resourceful child who had appeared in his kitchen like some kind of modern-day Oliver Twist. "What's your name?" Marcus asked softly, crouching down so that he was closer to her eye level, a gesture that seemed to ease some of the tension in her small shoulders. "Lucy," she whispered, then added with heartbreaking politeness that spoke of good parenting despite her current circumstances, "Lucy Parker, I'm really sorry I broke into your house, mister. I know stealing is wrong, and I know I shouldn't be here, but I haven't eaten anything since yesterday morning, and all the garbage cans I checked were empty or locked up tight." Marcus felt something twist painfully in his chest at her words. This child was apologizing to him for the crime of being hungry, showing more courtesy and moral awareness than many adults he dealt with in his business world. "Where are your parents, Lucy?" he asked gently, though something in her demeanor had already prepared him for an answer he wouldn't want to hear. Her small face crumpled slightly before she straightened her shoulders with visible effort, displaying a resilience that was both admirable and tragic in someone so young. "Daddy went to heaven after there was an accident at his work," she said, with the careful precision of someone who had practiced explaining this painful truth. "And Mommy got really sick after that, and she couldn't take care of me anymore. The people from the state government were going to take me away to live with strangers, so I ran away instead." At that precise moment, as if somehow sensing the presence of a stranger in the house, Daniel's voice echoed through the mansion's halls. But these weren't his usual distressed wails that had become so familiar. These sounds were different, almost curious, carrying a note that Marcus hadn't heard from his son in months. It was almost as if the baby was somehow welcoming this unexpected visitor. Lucy's head snapped toward the sound with immediate interest, and Marcus saw something in her expression that he'd never encountered before, genuine curiosity mixed with recognition, as if she understood something about Daniel's cries that he had missed entirely. "Is that your baby?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a warmth and interest that seemed to transform her entire demeanor from defensive survivor to caring child. "He sleeps in a very unusual way," Lucy observed with the matter-of-fact directness that seemed to be characteristic of her personality, standing on her tiptoes to peer over the rails of Daniel's custom-made crib. It was the following morning, and Marcus had made what he knew was probably an impulsive and potentially irresponsible decision to let this strange, enigmatic little girl stay the night, rather than immediately calling Child Protective Services. Something about Lucy felt profoundly important, though he couldn't articulate exactly why or what that importance might mean. Daniel was displaying his typical morning version of the standing sleep phenomenon, eyes firmly closed but body perfectly upright, swaying gently back and forth like a young tree responding to a breeze that no one else could feel. Lucy studied him with the focused intensity of a scientist examining a particularly fascinating specimen, her small hands gripping the crib rails while her intelligent blue eyes took in every detail of the scene before her. "All the babies I've ever seen sleep lying down flat," she continued thoughtfully, tilting her head to one side in a gesture that reminded Marcus of a curious bird. "Why doesn't your baby do that? It seems like it would be much more comfortable to lie down when you're sleeping." Marcus felt the familiar knot of frustration, fear, and helpless confusion tighten in his chest like a physical weight. "We honestly don't know, Lucy. I've consulted with some of the finest pediatric specialists in the entire world, and none of them can provide a satisfactory explanation for Daniel's behavior. "Have you tried asking him directly?" Lucy asked with complete seriousness, as if this were the most logical approach in the world. Marcus almost laughed out loud at the suggestion, but something in her tone, a combination of innocence and wisdom that seemed far beyond her years, stopped him from dismissing the idea immediately. "He's only 18 months old, Lucy. He can barely manage to say mama and dada clearly, much less explain complex behavioral patterns." Lucy reached through the crib rails and gently touched Daniel's small hand with her own dirt-stained fingers. The baby's eyes fluttered open immediately, and instead of the usual confused disorientation that typically followed his standing sleep episodes, Daniel looked directly at Lucy and produced something that Marcus hadn't seen from his son in weeks. A genuine, bright, delighted smile that seemed to illuminate his entire face. "Hi there, little baby," Lucy whispered, in the kind of gentle, soothing voice that seemed to come naturally to her, despite her own obvious hardships, and Daniel responded with an actual giggle, a sound of pure joy that Marcus had almost forgotten his son was capable of making. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the nursery doorway at that moment, carrying a breakfast tray laden with food for their unexpected young guest. "Mr. Whitmore, I've prepared a proper breakfast for Lucy, and I've taken the liberty of running a warm bath for her. She clearly needs some care and attention, and she seems like such a sweet child, despite her difficult circumstances." Marcus looked at Lucy with fresh eyes, really taking in the full extent of her condition in the clear morning light streaming through the nursery windows. Her clothes were not just dirty, but actually torn in several places. Her hair was so badly matted that it would probably require professional help to untangle, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of far too many sleepless nights spent in unsafe places. But it was her hands that captured his attention most powerfully, small and delicate as they should be for a 7-year-old, but covered in an intricate network of tiny scars and calluses that no child should ever have to develop. "Lucy," Marcus said as gently as he could manage, "how long have you been completely on your own taking care of yourself?" She shrugged with studied casualness, still playing peekaboo with Daniel, who seemed absolutely enchanted by her presence. "Since the summer started, I think. Maybe a little bit longer than that. Time gets kind of funny and hard to keep track of when you're hiding all the time and trying not to let the grown-ups find you." 3 days had passed since Lucy's dramatic midnight entrance into their lives, and Marcus found himself discovering her in the kitchen at dawn, standing on one of the sturdy wooden chairs positioned beside the large farmhouse sink. But this time, she wasn't raiding the refrigerator for food to satisfy her hunger. Instead, she was carefully, methodically bathing Daniel, who was standing comfortably in the shallow, warm water of the oversized kitchen sink, appearing more content and relaxed than Marcus had seen him in months. "Lucy, what exactly are you doing?" Marcus asked, his voice coming out sharper than he had intended as a surge of protective panic shot through him. The sight of his precious, irreplaceable son standing in a kitchen sink, supported only by a 7-year-old's small hands, sent waves of anxiety coursing through his entire nervous system. "I'm giving him his bath," Lucy replied, with the same matter-of-fact tone she used for everything, her hands remaining gentle but remarkably steady as she supported Daniel's back with movements that seemed far too practiced and skilled for someone her age. "He likes it so much better when he can stand up during bath time. Look carefully. He's not crying or fussing at all." She was absolutely right, and this realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. Daniel, who usually screamed and struggled through every single bath time, despite Mrs. Rodriguez's infinitely patient efforts and gentle techniques, was actually enjoying himself for what might have been the first time in his short life. His small hands splashed happily in the warm water, creating tiny waves and droplets that caught the early morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows, and he babbled contentedly as Lucy carefully washed his fine, dark hair with movements that demonstrated a level of competence that seemed almost impossible for a child her age. "Where did you learn how to bathe a baby so expertly?" Marcus asked, moving closer to the sink, but resisting his strong parental urge to immediately snatch Daniel away from what his anxious mind insisted was a dangerous situation, despite all evidence to the contrary. "I had to take care of my mommy when she got really sick and couldn't do things for herself anymore," Lucy said quietly, her attention focused entirely on Daniel, but her voice carrying undertones of sadness that made Marcus's heart ache. "She needed help with lots of basic things, so I had to learn how to do them properly. My daddy taught me the most important basics before he died in the accident, but I figured out a lot of other stuff by myself through trial and error." The mention of the accident was the first time Lucy had provided any specific details about how her father had died, and Marcus felt a chill of premonition run down his spine. "What kind of accident happened to your father, Lucy?" Lucy's hands stilled for just a moment in the warm water, and Marcus could see the subtle tension that crept into her small shoulders whenever she had to discuss her family's tragedy. "It was at a construction site where he worked," she said, with the carefully controlled tone of someone who had been forced to explain this painful truth too many times. "Something really heavy fell on him from way up high. The other workers said he died instantly, so he didn't suffer or anything like that." She paused, then added with a bitter wisdom that no 7-year-old should possess, "Daddy was building fancy houses for rich people when it happened. Big, expensive houses just like this one." The cruel irony of the situation wasn't lost on Marcus for even a second. This child's father had literally died, building homes for people exactly like him, while his daughter had ended up homeless and desperate, sleeping in alleys and breaking into those same types of houses just to find enough food to survive another day. "Lucy," Marcus said carefully, his mind racing as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even realized existed began to fall into place. "When you were taking care of your mother during her illness, did she ever sleep strangely, in unusual positions like Daniel does?" Lucy's head snapped up with sudden understanding, her blue eyes widening as she made a connection that had eluded 17 medical specialists. "You think it might be the same thing that was wrong with Mommy?" "I don't know for certain, but it's possible. Can you tell me exactly what your mother's sleeping problems were like?" Lucy lifted Daniel out of the sink with practiced efficiency and wrapped him securely in a soft towel, and the baby nestled against her small frame with complete trust and contentment, his dark eyes bright and alert in a way that Marcus rarely witnessed during bath time with anyone else, including himself. "Mommy couldn't lie down flat, especially near the end," Lucy said slowly, as if she were carefully piecing together fragments of a complex puzzle that had been scattered across her memory. "The doctors said it was because of her heart condition, that lying down made it too hard for her to breathe properly. But the weird thing was, it actually started happening long before she got really sick with the heart problems." Marcus felt his entire world tilt slightly on its axis. How much longer before? A really long time. "Since I was very little, like really, really little," Lucy said, her brow furrowing with the effort of reaching back into her earliest memories. She used to sleep sitting up in her favorite chair instead of in bed, even when she seemed to be feeling perfectly fine otherwise. She told me once that she'd try to lie down in bed like normal people, but she'd have these terrible dreams, really bad dreams about falling down into dark places. The realization hit Marcus with the force of a physical blow, and he felt the pieces of an impossible puzzle suddenly click into place with terrifying clarity. He looked at his son, who was making happy gurgling sounds in Lucy's arms, and felt the weight of understanding settle on his shoulders like a crushing burden. "Lucy," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "I think you may have just solved a mystery that 17 different doctors couldn't even begin to understand." That evening, Marcus sat in his mahogany-paneled study, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. while Lucy curled up like a small cat in the oversized leather chair across from his antique desk. Daniel slept peacefully in her thin arms, lying down completely relaxed for the first time in his 18 months of life, as the fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with leather-bound books, business awards, and photographs that documented a life of achievement that paled in comparison to the revelation unfolding before him. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds with mechanical precision, marking time in a world that had fundamentally shifted in the span of a single conversation with a 7-year-old girl who possessed wisdom born from suffering that no child should ever have to endure. "Tell me more about those dreams," Marcus said gently, his voice barely above a whisper as he leaned forward in his chair. "The ones your mother experienced. I need to understand exactly what she went through, because I think it might be the key to helping Daniel." Lucy's voice took on a dreamy, distant quality as she reached back into memories that were both precious and painful. Mommy said the dreams always started the same way. She'd be lying in bed, feeling safe and warm, but then the bed would start to feel like it was sinking, like the mattress was made of quicksand or something. She'd try to get up, but she couldn't move her arms or legs, and she'd just keep sinking deeper and deeper. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he listened to the description. The psychological trauma was so much more complex than he'd initially understood. "And then what would happen in the dreams?" he asked softly. "She'd fall through the floor, through the ground, through layers and layers of dirt and rock, falling down toward where Daddy was buried," Lucy continued, her small fingers absently stroking Daniel's hair as she spoke. "She said it felt so real that when she woke up she'd be terrified that if she lay down again, she really would fall through and disappear forever, and then there would be nobody left to take care of me." The profound psychological connection became crystal clear to Marcus. Sophia had died, giving birth to Daniel. The baby had never known his mother's voice, her touch, her presence, but somehow he had absorbed the existential terror of separation, the primal fear that lying down meant falling away from the people who loved him, never to return. "But Lucy," Marcus said carefully, "how did you know to make this connection? How did you understand something that trained psychiatrists and sleep specialists completely missed?" Lucy looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes that seemed to hold depths of understanding far beyond her chronological age. "When you've lost the most important people in your whole life, you learn to recognize that same kind of hurt in other people, even when they can't talk about it yet. My daddy used to tell me that broken things have a way of recognizing each other, like they speak a special language that only makes sense to other broken things." She shifted Daniel slightly in her arms, and the baby sighed contentedly without waking, his small face peaceful in a way Marcus hadn't seen since those first few days after his birth. "Besides," Lucy continued with matter-of-fact wisdom, "grown-ups always try to fix things by thinking really hard and using big words and fancy machines. But sometimes the answer isn't complicated at all. Sometimes it's just about understanding that someone is scared and helping them feel safe again." Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes as the simple truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He'd spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on specialists, tests, and equipment when the answer had been right there all along. His son was grieving for a mother he'd never known, expressing that grief in the only way an infant could. "Daniel knows his mommy is gone, doesn't he?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "Babies are much smarter than people think," Lucy said seriously. "He knows she should be here, and he knows she's not. And somewhere deep inside, he's figured out that lying down is what made her go away forever. So he won't do it, because he's afraid it will make him disappear too, and then you'd be all alone just like I am." The weight of understanding settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. His son wasn't just experiencing a sleep disorder. He was experiencing existential terror, the fear of death and separation that most people don't develop until much later in life. "How do we help him, Lucy?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking slightly. "How do we show him that lying down doesn't mean disappearing?" Lucy smiled with a radiance that transformed her entire face. "We show him that love doesn't disappear just because you can't see it. We teach him that his mommy is still watching over him, still loving him, even though she's not here in the way he wishes she could be. And most importantly, we prove to him that the people who are here, like you and me, will always be here when he wakes up." The next morning brought the first real breakthrough in Daniel's condition, though it came in a way that Marcus never could have anticipated. He found Lucy in the nursery at sunrise, sitting cross-legged on the plush carpet beside Daniel's crib, humming a melody he didn't recognize, while the baby stood at the rails, completely transfixed by her voice. "What song is that?" Marcus asked softly, not wanting to break the spell that seemed to have settled over both children. "It's something my daddy used to sing to me when I had nightmares," Lucy replied, without stopping her gentle humming. "He said it was a song about how love travels through the air, even when people can't be together physically. He told me that whenever I felt scared or alone, I could sing this song and remember that the people who love me are always close by, even if I can't see them." As Lucy continued humming, something extraordinary happened. Daniel's rigid posture began to relax, his small hands loosening their death grip on the crib rails. His eyes, which had been wide and alert with the constant vigilance that had become his norm, started to grow heavy with natural sleepiness. "Lucy," Marcus whispered urgently, "keep singing. Something's happening." Lucy's voice grew slightly stronger, and she began to add words to the melody, simple, repetitive phrases about sunshine and moonbeams, about guardian angels and invisible hugs, about how love could travel on the wind and wrap around people like the softest blanket imaginable. Daniel's eyes closed, but instead of the stiff, unnatural standing sleep that had become his trademark, his body began to sway gently from side to side. Then, in a moment that made Marcus's heart stop beating entirely, the 18-month-old slowly, carefully lowered himself down until he was sitting in his crib. "Oh my God," Marcus breathed, afraid to move or speak too loudly and break whatever magic was occurring before his eyes. Lucy continued singing, her voice soft and hypnotic, and Daniel continued his gradual descent until he was lying on his side, curled up like any normal toddler, breathing deeply and peacefully. For the first time in his entire life, Daniel was sleeping lying down without any distress, panic, or fear. "How did you do that?" Marcus asked in amazement, once he was certain Daniel was truly asleep. "I didn't do anything special," Lucy said with characteristic modesty. "I just helped him remember that lying down can be safe and comfortable when you know that someone who loves you is watching over you." The song helped him understand that his mommy's love is still here, just in a different form. Marcus stared at his son in wonder. After months of sleepless nights, expensive consultations, and growing desperation, the solution had been as simple and as profound as helping a grieving child feel safe and loved. "Lucy," Marcus said slowly, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. How would you feel about staying here permanently? About becoming part of our family?" Lucy's eyes widened with surprise and something that looked like hope, though she tried to hide it behind her practiced caution. "You mean like adoption? Like really becoming Daniel's sister?" "Exactly like that," Marcus confirmed. "You've already done more for Daniel in 3 days than all the specialists accomplished in months. But more than that, you've become important to both of us. This house has been so quiet and sad since Sophia died, and you've brought something back into it that I thought we'd lost forever." Lucy looked down at Daniel, who was sleeping more peacefully than Marcus had ever seen him, then back up at Marcus with tears glistening in her blue eyes. "I've never had a real family before," she whispered. "I mean, I had Mommy and Daddy, but that was different. This would be like having a brother and a daddy who chose me on purpose." "Yes," Marcus said firmly. "A family that chose each other, not just because of blood, but because of love and understanding and the fact that sometimes the most broken people can help heal each other." Lucy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and nodded solemnly. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Whitmore. I promise I'll be the best big sister Daniel could ever have." As if he could hear and understand the conversation happening around him, Daniel stirred slightly in his sleep and smiled, still lying peacefully on his side. 2 weeks later, the transformation in the Whitmore household was nothing short of miraculous. Daniel had been lying down consistently for 10 consecutive nights, and his entire personality seemed to be blossoming like a flower that had finally received the right combination of sunlight and water. He laughed more, played more actively, and had started calling Lucy Sissy in his sweet, babbling voice that made everyone in the house smile. Marcus stood in his home office, reviewing the adoption paperwork that his lawyer had prepared with remarkable efficiency. The legal process was moving forward smoothly, with Lucy's tragic circumstances actually simplifying what could have been a complex and time-consuming procedure. Child Protective Services had been relieved to find such an ideal placement for a child who had been failed by the system in so many ways. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked softly on the office door, her face glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from witnessing genuine healing and growth. "Mr. Whitmore, you need to come see this. Lucy has taught Daniel something extraordinary." Marcus followed her to the living room, where he found Lucy sitting on the Persian rug, with Daniel in her lap, both of them facing the large oil painting of Sophia that hung above the fireplace. It was a portrait Marcus had commissioned during Sophia's pregnancy, capturing her radiant beauty and the joy she'd felt about becoming a mother. "Look, Danny," Lucy was saying softly, pointing up at the painting. "That's your beautiful mommy. She loves you so much, even though she had to go to heaven before she could hold you and sing to you herself. But she's always watching over you, and she's so proud of what a good, brave little boy you're growing up to be." Daniel looked up at the portrait with focused attention, then clapped his small hands together and said something that sounded remarkably like "Mama." Marcus felt his knees go weak. Daniel had never shown any recognition of his mother's image before, had never seemed to understand who the woman in the painting was supposed to be. "She talks to him about Sophia every day," Mrs. Rodriguez whispered. "She's helping him understand that his mother's absence doesn't mean he was abandoned, and that loving someone doesn't have to end just because they're not physically present." Lucy looked up and noticed Marcus watching. "I hope it's okay that I tell him about his mommy," she said with sudden uncertainty. "I thought it might help him understand that she didn't choose to leave him, and that love doesn't disappear just because someone dies." "It's more than okay," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's exactly what he needed, and exactly what I should have been doing all along but didn't know how." Lucy smiled and turned back to Daniel. "Your daddy loves you very much too, Danny. And now you have a big sister who will always make sure you feel safe and happy. We're a family now, and families take care of each other no matter what." Daniel giggled and reached up to touch Lucy's face, then pointed again at his mother's portrait and said, "Mama," more clearly than before. "That's right, little brother," Lucy said, hugging him close. "That's your mama, and she's beautiful just like you are." Marcus watched this scene unfold with a heart so full of gratitude and love that he thought it might burst. In the span of 2 weeks, Lucy had not only solved Daniel's mysterious sleeping condition, but had also helped both of them begin to heal from the devastating loss that had shaped their lives since Daniel's birth. The house that had once echoed with silence and unspoken grief was now filled with laughter, conversation, and the sound of a family learning how to be whole again despite the missing piece that would always be part of their story. As if sensing his father's emotional state, Daniel looked over at Marcus and reached out his arms, clearly asking to be picked up. Marcus lifted his son and was rewarded with a spontaneous hug and a wet kiss on his cheek. "Daddy," Daniel said clearly, and Marcus realized it was the first time his son had ever called him that with such obvious love and recognition. "Yes, buddy," Marcus whispered against Daniel's soft hair. "I'm your daddy, and I love you more than all the stars in the sky." Lucy stood up and wrapped her thin arms around both of them, creating a group hug that felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. "We're really a family now," she said with wonder in her voice. "Yes," Marcus agreed, "we really are." The revelation came on a Thursday evening in November, when autumn had settled fully over Connecticut and the trees surrounding the estate displayed their magnificent farewell performance in shades of gold, crimson, and deep amber. Marcus was reviewing some business documents in his study when he heard Lucy's voice calling urgently from the nursery, carrying a note of excitement rather than alarm that made him set down his papers and hurry toward the sound. He found Lucy kneeling beside Daniel's crib, her face illuminated with the kind of joy that transforms a person's entire appearance. Daniel was not only lying down peacefully, but he had arranged his stuffed animals around himself in a careful circle, creating what looked like a protective barrier of soft, comforting companions. "Look what he's doing," Lucy whispered, her voice filled with amazement. "He's not just lying down anymore, he's making himself feel safe on purpose. He's learned that he can control his environment and make it feel secure." Marcus stared at his son in wonder. Daniel had independently developed a coping mechanism, a way to make lying down feel safe and controlled rather than dangerous and vulnerable. The circle of stuffed animals wasn't random, it was a deliberate construction, a fortress of comfort that allowed him to rest without fear. "This is incredible," Marcus breathed. "He's not just overcoming his fear, he's actively creating conditions that make him feel secure." But Lucy's expression had grown thoughtful, and Marcus could see that she was processing something deeper than Daniel's obvious progress. "Mr. Whitmore, Daddy," she said, still getting used to the new title that made Marcus's heart skip every time she used it. "There's something else I need to tell you about my mommy's condition. Something I didn't mention before because I wasn't sure if it was important." Marcus settled into the rocking chair beside the crib, giving Lucy his full attention. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Before Mommy got really sick with her heart, she started having other symptoms that the doctors couldn't explain," Lucy said slowly, as if she were carefully sorting through complex memories. "She would have these episodes where she'd forget things, not big things, but little details about conversations we'd had or places we'd been together. And sometimes she'd seem confused about what time it was or what day it was." A cold chill ran down Marcus's spine. "How old was your mother when she died, Lucy?" "She was 32, Lucy replied, "but she'd been having the sleep problems and the memory issues since she was about 28, I think, right after Daddy died." Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis as a terrible possibility began to take shape in his mind. The combination of symptoms, sleep disturbances, memory problems, confusion about time and place, could indicate something far more serious than simple grief-related trauma. "Lucy," he said carefully, "did your mother ever see a neurologist, a brain doctor?" Lucy shook her head. "The regular doctors said her problems were because she was sad about Daddy and stressed about taking care of me by herself. They gave her pills for sadness and pills for sleeping, but nothing really helped much." Marcus's mind was racing now, connecting dots that painted a picture he desperately didn't want to see. If Lucy's mother had had an undiagnosed neurological condition, something genetic that could be passed down to children. Then both Lucy and Daniel could potentially be at risk. "Lucy," he said as gently as possible, "I think we need to have some medical tests done, just to make sure you're completely healthy and to check on some things that might run in families." Lucy's face grew serious, and Marcus could see the intelligence behind her blue eyes as she made connections that were probably similar to his own. "You think I might have the same thing that made Mommy sick?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "But I think it's important that we find out, because if there is something, the earlier we catch it, the better we can take care of it. And the same goes for Daniel." Lucy nodded with the kind of mature acceptance that continued to amaze Marcus. "If it means keeping Daniel safe and healthy, then I want to do all the tests. I don't want him to go through what my mommy went through." Marcus reached over and took her small hand in his. "Whatever we find out, Lucy, we'll face it together as a family. You're not alone anymore, and neither is Daniel. We'll take care of each other no matter what." Lucy squeezed his hand and looked down at Daniel, who was sleeping peacefully in his circle of stuffed animals, completely unaware of the potential storm clouds gathering around his future. "He looks so happy now," Lucy said softly. "Even if there are scary things we have to deal with, at least we helped him learn how to sleep without being afraid." Marcus nodded, watching his son's peaceful face and feeling a complex mixture of pride, love, and growing concern about what the future might hold for all of them. The medical tests began the following Monday at the prestigious Hartford Children's Hospital, where Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a renowned pediatric neurologist, conducted a comprehensive evaluation of both Lucy and Daniel with the thoroughness that Marcus's wealth and influence could command. The hospital's state-of-the-art equipment hummed and beeped around them as a team of specialists ran every conceivable test to map the children's neurological health. Lucy faced each procedure with remarkable courage, holding Daniel's hand when it was his turn and singing softly to him during the more uncomfortable tests. Her resilience continued to amaze Marcus, but he could see the underlying tension in her small shoulders as they waited for results that could fundamentally change their understanding of their future as a family. Dr. Warren met with Marcus privately on Thursday afternoon, her expression carefully controlled in the way that medical professionals learn when they have difficult news to deliver. The autumn sunlight streamed through her office windows, but Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "The good news, Doctor," Warren began, "is that both children show no current signs of any degenerative neurological conditions. Their brain scans are completely normal, their cognitive function is excellent, and their motor skills are appropriate for their ages." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, but Dr. Warren's careful phrasing suggested there was more to the story. And the less good news. "We found genetic markers that indicate a predisposition to early-onset Huntington's disease," Dr. Warren said gently. "Based on Lucy's description of her mother's symptoms and the genetic testing we conducted, it's highly likely that her mother was in the early stages of the condition when she died." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Huntington's disease was a devastating neurodegenerative condition that typically manifested in middle age, causing progressive loss of movement, cognitive ability, and emotional control. If Lucy carried the gene, she would almost certainly develop the disease sometime in her 20s or 30s. "What does this mean for Lucy specifically?" Marcus asked, his voice barely steady. "Lucy has inherited one copy of the mutated gene from her mother," Dr. Warren explained. "This means she will likely develop Huntington's disease, probably in her late 20s or early 30s, based on her mother's timeline. However, and this is crucial, medical science is advancing rapidly in this area. There are promising treatments in development, and there's reason to hope that by the time Lucy reaches the age where symptoms typically appear, we may have much more effective interventions available." Marcus felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. This brave, brilliant little girl, who had already suffered so much loss, would face another devastating challenge in her future. And Daniel? He forced himself to ask. Daniel has a 50% chance of having inherited the gene from Lucy's mother through their shared genetic connection, Dr. Warren said. We won't be able to test him definitively until he's older and can make his own informed decision about whether he wants to know his genetic status. Many people choose not to know, preferring to live without the burden of that knowledge. Marcus stared out the window at the hospital parking lot, watching families come and go with their own burdens of hope and fear. How do I tell Lucy about this? Very carefully, and with emphasis on the fact that she has many, many good years ahead of her, Dr. Warren advised. Children are remarkably resilient, and Lucy has already demonstrated extraordinary strength. The key is to help her understand that having a genetic predisposition doesn't define her life or limit what she can accomplish. That evening, Marcus sat with Lucy in their living room, the fire crackling softly, while Daniel played with his toys on the carpet nearby, blissfully unaware of the conversation that was about to unfold. Marcus had spent hours thinking about how to approach this topic, and finally decided that Lucy deserved the same honesty and respect that she had always shown him. "Lucy," he began gently, "we got the results from your medical tests, and I need to share them with you. But first, I want you to know that no matter what, you're my daughter now, and nothing will ever change that." Lucy looked up at him with those impossibly wise blue eyes. "It's bad news, isn't it?" "It's complicated news," Marcus said carefully. "The doctors found that you might develop the same condition that made your mother sick, but probably not until you're much older. Maybe 28 or 30, like she was." Lucy was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the same thoughtful consideration she brought to everything. "Will I die like Mommy did?" Marcus felt tears burn behind his eyes. "The doctors are working very hard to find better treatments, and they think that by the time you're older, they'll know much more about how to help people with this condition. But yes, it's a serious illness." Lucy nodded slowly, then looked over at Daniel, who was building a tower with his blocks. "What about Daniel?" "We don't know yet, and we won't know for many years, but whatever happens, we'll face it together as a family." Lucy was quiet for several more minutes, and Marcus could practically see her young mind working through the implications. Finally, she looked up at him with a smile that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "Then I guess we'd better make sure all our time together is really, really good," she said simply. 6 months later, on a warm spring morning when the gardens of the Whitmore estate were bursting with new life and possibility, Marcus stood at the kitchen window watching Lucy and Daniel play together on the expansive lawn. Daniel, now 2 years old, was running around with the boundless energy of a healthy toddler, his sleeping difficulties nothing more than a memory from a darker time in their family's history. Lucy, now 8 and officially adopted as Lucy Whitmore, chased after her little brother with infectious laughter, her arms outstretched as she pretended to be an airplane. The transformation in both children over the past months had been nothing short of miraculous, and Marcus often found himself overwhelmed with gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had brought Lucy into their lives. The kitchen door opened, and Dr. Sarah Martinez, the family therapist they'd been working with, joined Marcus at the window. She'd become not just a professional resource, but a friend who had helped them navigate the complex emotional landscape of their unconventional family formation. "They look happy," Dr. Martinez observed, watching Lucy help Daniel climb onto a small garden bench. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Marcus agreed. "Lucy has this incredible ability to find joy in every day, even knowing what she knows about her future. She's teaching Daniel and me how to live fully in the present moment." Children have a remarkable capacity for resilience, Dr. Martinez said. And Lucy has something even more powerful. She has love, security, and purpose. She knows she's valued and needed, and that gives her strength to face whatever challenges lie ahead. Through the window, they watched Lucy lift Daniel into her arms and point up at a bird's nest in one of the oak trees. Even from a distance, they could see her explaining something to him with animated gestures, sharing knowledge and wonder in the way that the best teachers do. "Have you given any more thought to the research foundation?" Dr. Martinez asked. Marcus nodded. One of his major decisions over the past few months had been to establish the Sophia Whitmore Foundation for Huntington's disease research, investing a significant portion of his wealth in finding better treatments and ultimately a cure for the condition that threatened Lucy's future. "The initial funding is in place, and we've assembled a team of the brightest researchers in the field," Marcus said. "Lucy insisted on being involved in the planning. She wants to help other families who are dealing with similar challenges." "That doesn't surprise me at all," Dr. Martinez smiled. "She has the soul of a healer." Indeed, as if she could sense them watching, Lucy looked toward the kitchen window and waved enthusiastically, then said something to Daniel that made him wave too, his small hand opening and closing in the universal gesture of childhood greeting. Marcus waved back, his heart full of a love so profound it sometimes took his breath away. This little girl, who had entered his life as a desperate thief, had become the missing piece that completed their family puzzle. She had solved Daniel's mysterious condition not through medical expertise, but through understanding, compassion, and the simple recognition that sometimes healing requires nothing more than helping someone feel safe and loved. "You know," Marcus said to Dr. Martinez, "when Lucy first told me that broken things recognize each other, I thought she was just being wise beyond her years. But now I understand that she wasn't talking about being broken at all. She was talking about being human, about the fact that we all carry wounds and fears, and the most beautiful thing we can do is help each other heal." Outside, Lucy had started a game of tag with Daniel, letting him catch her easily and then pretending to be dramatically frozen until he giggled and unfroze her with a hug. Their laughter carried through the open window like music, filling the house with the sound of joy and belonging. "Whatever time we have together," Marcus continued, "whether it's 10 years or 50 years, we're going to make it count. Lucy has taught us that life isn't about how long you have. It's about how much love you can share and how many people you can help along the way." Dr. Martinez nodded, watching the children play with professional appreciation for the healing power of secure attachment and unconditional love. "They're going to be okay, Marcus. All three of you. You've created something beautiful here." And beam, as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden light across the gardens and the children who ran through them without fear, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. They had faced the darkness together and emerged into the light, not unchanged, but stronger, more compassionate, and infinitely more grateful for every precious day they shared as a family. The mystery of Daniel's sleeping condition had been solved, but more importantly, they had all learned that the greatest mysteries of life, love, healing, family, and hope, don't require solving at all. They simply require embracing, celebrating, and sharing with the people who matter most. Outside, Lucy's laughter rang out across the estate like a bell, and Marcus knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, with courage, with love, and with the unshakable knowledge that sometimes the most broken people are exactly the ones who know best how to heal.